Hey folks, Dust here, and I wanted to discuss a trade we saw happen recently, which is apparently officially a loan, and so things could change going forward. But for now, we do have Mertz of North heading over to Heroic, and in his place from Heroic is going to be Niko going to North. And we know this is at least going to be the case for the Major and for the foreseeable future. So I want to talk a little bit about Mertz, a little bit about Niko, and just a little bit about this move and how it affects both teams. So we'll start off by just briefly talking a little bit about Mertz's background and what he's done so far on North. Of course, he's a very young player, currently only 19, and really the way he got his start was via the North Academy team, which is a team that throughout 2017 played at a few smaller events like Copenhagen Games 2017 and things like the Binary Dragons Prestige LAN. So again, you're kind of stretching to think of LANs that people would actually know, but they did play at some smaller stuff and at times did okay. I think the highlight of this team was probably qualifying for DreamHack Winter last year, and they did so with a really impressive run. They beat teams like King 1 LDLC, AGO, and Space Soldiers to make the event, so nice run there. But at the event, they came dead last, getting knocked out in the groups by Esports and Big. But in all of this, Mertz looked very good individually, particularly the online portion of qualifying for DreamHack Winter. He put up fantastic numbers in all of the games against some of these other kind of tier 2, tier 3 teams. And even in these losses they had at the main event to Mousesports and Big, he had a couple of really impressive maps with the AWP. And he certainly looked just throughout his time on the Academy team to be a player worthy of being given a chance on the main squad. Granted, Yugi was probably the more, attractive candidate to come in to play for North, but for whatever reason it didn't really happen. Obviously Yugi goes on to play for Optic instead, and so Mertz was, I think, validly given a chance to try things out in the main team. Yeah, the North Academy team as a whole didn't really do a whole lot, kind of like a somewhat rising Mountain Dew League level team, but never really even make the playoffs of that, and so they weren't like a team that ever make a threat at the world rankings. But a couple of their players look pretty good, Mertz being one of them, and so he does get his chance for North starting at CS Summit 2 to kick off 2018, as well as, IM Katowice at that point, and really slow start at these events. Obviously didn't do so great. Copenhagen Games was absolutely an embarrassment for North, and obviously a kind of a tough time for Mertz, but they could start to get a little bit better. You started to see this team kind of pick things up at some of the smaller events, like some of the DreamHack Open stops and that BetsNet Masters event earlier this year where they took second, obviously doing really well at Tour. And so this is, some of the things starting to go right for the team finally, and it kind of culminated in this top 4 finish at the Starlighter Season 5 finals, where Mertz played fantastic at this event. I mean, they were able to come out of the groups with some wins against Energy, Hellraisers, and Godsent after some losses to NIP and a really close loss to Mousesports. And then in the playoffs, they were able to beat AGO 2-1. Then they went up against Energy in the semis, where they wound up losing a 1-2 series. And so this was a pretty good mark for Mertz as an individual player, and North's finally starting to get a little bit of something going. But obviously DreamHack Summer and ESO1 Cologne did not go so well. Granted, DreamHack Summer wasn't that bad. They still placed top 4, losing in the semis to Optic, but Cologne was definitely a rougher affair, and with some recency bias in mind, you would certainly say, Mertz struggled a little bit in these 2 events, but overall it seemed like his trajectory was going up. But there were a couple of problems, I feel like, about Mertz as a player. For one, when watching him, it felt like he did really well and he had a support system in place, like on T sides when he was being set up to do certain things. He certainly had that swagger about him, willing to go for aggressive plays, could definitely create openings for his team on T sides at times. But on, say, CT sides, he seemed to really struggle when he got left on his own. I don't know if it was the pressure got to him or if it's just the lack of experience, but he would often cause really big problems. I think the most notable example is when he was left to anchor the B-bomb site on Inferno. He would often play over-aggressive, often re-peek, do these weird things, get killed, leave the B-bomb site wide open before anyone could really rotate through spawn to help him out or help defend the B-bomb site, and that would set his team back. And there was other situations on CT sides where he would do these types of things that would cause a real problem. And I know that one of North's big issues that they even cited was their lack of consistency on CT sides, and I think that this certainly played as one of the contributing factors for why their CT sides could struggle at times, was this idea that sometimes Mertz would crumble when left on his own, so to speak. And on top of that, he also suffered from almost the same syndrome that Henny, the Brazilian opper, did, where he'd hit like the really flashy, crazy flick shots, and he would sometimes miss kind of the standard ones that you'd expect to hit. So he could look really flashy and really impressive against something like Henne, even Drake in the past would kind of suffer from. He kind of had a little bit of that to him too. Could look really impressive at times, but then he left be scratching your head sometimes. What the hell just happened? And so was he a player that should be cut? I don't know. I think you could have given him a little bit more time to develop, perhaps. I think maybe a little bit more experience, a little bit more events under his belt, maybe a little bit more guidance from coaching staff. He probably could have developed into more of a player. But if you felt like you had to make a change on the team, I don't know who else you could have cut. Like, unless you're going to cut MSL and make a drastic change in the direction of your team leadership-wise, I'm not really sure who else you could have gone after, because I think Valda's an absolute stud. He deserves to be on this team, no doubt about it. I think AZ has actually stepped up his game quite a lot, and you just brought Kierby in, and he has been improving a bit, despite the fact he has not looked like the star-level player he looked like on Astralis, or even in his last outings with MSL back on the Dignitas days. But it kind of leads it to where there was really no other fat to trim, so to speak. So I guess the vulnerable and easy target to pick is the least experienced player, the one that has had a couple of bad events recently, and so that's, the move that happens. Now we look over to niko. We'll talk a little bit about him. Again, this is another really young player in the scene, only 20 years old at the time of this video, and of course, he didn't even really have the whole North Academy experience. He was playing on Tricked, actually, for a little while. So, decent team over in the Danish scene. Then he comes in for Glaive on Heroic in October of 2016, which made the lineup Snappy, Valda, Madi, Freeze, and niko. But, of course, in February, just a few months later in 2017, they actually wound up cutting Freeze for Yugi. And this team you thought would be pretty good. Like, you still had Valda, who was really good. niko comes in, young, promising rifler. You got Yugi, a very promising AWP player. You got Madi, that experienced veteran. Like, this is a team you might think, hey, could do some damage. But prior to Yugi coming on board, they struggled at the end of 2016, had a really embarrassing ESWC event, for example, and didn't do well at the minor for that first E-League major. The Northern Arena Montreal event was kind of iffy, like a couple of okay results, but still didn't wind up with a big finish. But I will say, at least for niko's sake, this was some of the first times he would ever travel internationally to play LAN events. Just like Mertz, he was quite an unexperienced player coming into Heroic as far as big LAN tournaments, and he actually was playing pretty well at some of these events, particularly SWC 2016. He got his numbers despite the fact the team really kind of flopped, and that really was the story for a while there. But then, Yugi comes on board and they actually had like a pretty good event at IM Katowice where they took top 4 in 2017, beating teams like North and Navi and VP in groups in that system, and lost a really close 0-2 series to Astralis in the semifinals. So this is pretty good little job here. Took top 4 at DreamHack Austin as well, so you're thinking, okay, like maybe there's something going on here. But then really disappointing finish at Tor, really tanked at Cologne right afterwards. And, currently Heroic sits at 30th in the world and hasn't really done anything too crazy. Usually do pretty good at DreamHack Open stops, like did pretty well at Valencia and Atlanta in 2017. This year, did okay at Austin and Valencia, had that top 8 at EPL Season 7 finals as well, but really not too much outside of that. But focusing on niko, a player, very decent rifler. I mean, he's not the guy that you look at and he just really kind of knocks your socks off and you think, oh, we got to have this guy, he's so good. But he definitely seems to do pretty well in the roles he gets put in, and he definitely has produced enough numbers to warrant being looked at and being considered to maybe move up the ladder, especially if Heroic as a team is going to continue to plummet. niko's definitely a player that probably deserves a little bit better than that. Again, he's not like a crazy superstar level player, but he's like a luxury 3rd, 4th best player on your team. If you already have some established stars, he's a guy that can slot in and probably do a little bit of damage with the rifle, especially on like CT sides. If you want someone who's a little bit more experienced than Mertz, a little bit more stable, can play his spots really well, this is certainly a guy with a rifle who can kind of handle a lot of that. But now let's talk about how these players fit into their new teams and talk a little bit about the pros and cons. So we'll start with North, and we'll talk about niko coming in. Obviously, the first thing that comes to mind is you're replacing an opper with a rifler. And this seems really odd, especially when MSL just did an interview during Valencia when they were using Mixwell as a stand-in. They wound up winning the event. They talked about how when they benched Mertz, they felt like they needed a more experienced and a smarter opper, kind of alluding to some of the things I just said about maybe some of his struggles when he was left alone on CT sides. Yet you say that, but you bring in a rifler. So who is going to opt now is the big question. Now, yeah, you could argue, oh, they don't need a primary op. Look at a team like Liquid. Nitro might pick up the op, occasionally, but they don't rely on having a primary opper. Well, guess what? Best teams in the world have a really good primary opper. Astralis, FaZe, Navi. All these teams that are kind of sitting over there, in the top 5 of the world or what have you, are all teams that have what I consider to be, pretty fantastic AWP players. So I think it can be a burden to your team to not have a really good AWP player, if I'm being 100% honest with you. Not that it's impossible, but again, I just think that you open up so many options to have an elite level opper on what you can do on CT sides, how you can look for picks on T sides. The impact a really strong prime opper can have is insane. So to not have one, I think, can set you back and can make things a lot harder, even if you can, in theory, succeed if you have really good riflers and maybe a really good system in place to kind of work them all out. So again, certainly a raise for concern on that whole situation. Also a big concern for me is I feel like niko plays a lot of the things that KRB is already doing for North. I mean, niko would kind of be a secondary entry fragger to Snappy a lot of the time, like say on Mirage taking mid control, or say on Overpass trying to take control of bathrooms on the A side of the map. This is a guy who was, buddy with his in-game leader entry fragger, and that's the type of role that he played. Well, that's what KRB does with MSL on these maps and just in general. So you got to wonder, can niko learn how to play a new position? Is KRB going to move around a little bit? And then again, who's going to pick up the AWP? There's a lot of question marks there, and I think there's even some CT spots that are going to be weird. Like, I know that niko would play B a lot on, say, Mirage, for example, for Heroic, which I know that's something that KRB and MSL just started doing. They kind of just made a swap, actually, with their players on what sites everyone played on Mirage, at least from what I saw recently in demos. So, again, some CT spots going to be worked out. Like, who's going to play Inter on Train? That's what niko was doing, but that's what Valda does for North, and he's quite good at it. So, you have to wonder about how CT spots are going to shift around as well. If you're trying to build a more consistent CT side, that was your weak area, having to change positions around could certainly, in the short term at least, make that a little bit more complicated. So again, I think niko overall is a good player. I think in different circumstances, he's a good pickup. But I do wonder a little bit about what it means in this particular situation. Because again, I think losing an opper, not finding a replacement opper could be a problem. I think NanoSaphics would have been a good shot for this, by the way. Again, I think niko can be a good player, but it's just all about, can he adapt, or can someone else adapt to make room for each other, for everyone to feel comfortable in what spots they're playing. And again, how do you get around the fact that you don't really have a strong AWP player, at least a traditional one that we know for sure can be good with the AWP. And again, I think there's still some other issues that North have to work past. Like, for one, I feel like KRB needs to step up more. That's not to say that KRB's bad, by the way, but he's just not the superstar level player that we saw in Astralis, or that we saw in the Dignitas days in like 2016. Like, that just doesn't seem to be happening for him just yet. He's certainly gotten better over time. Like, the slow start he had when he first rejoined North, he definitely seems to be getting past that a little bit, but I would just like to see a little bit more, because I think Val is already doing quite a lot. And so, even though AZ is improving as well, like, I don't think AZ is ever going to be like the big superstar player. So I feel like it has to like be Valda and KRB as like the big driving force, and then AZ can kind of just stay where he is. And maybe if niko can kind of play at the level he was playing at on Heroic, they could have enough overall firepower. But again, it's just all going to come down to how roles fit and all that good stuff. And let's just talk overall performance-wise for North. I mean, this is a team that, again, is starting to really do well at, DreamHack Open events, these kind of Tier 2 events, seem to be really find their footing there. But when you kind of chart back even into last year, even though they've had a couple of really cool Tier 1 results, if you just look at the result on paper, the number that they placed, like the last couple of DreamHack Masters events, for example, at Malmo and Vegas, and like E-League Premier, not the most recent one, but the one before that, and a couple other events, like, yeah, they can have some pretty big placings, but the fact of the matter is they don't really have very many, at least, best of 3 wins over elite level teams. Granted, some of these events you can only beat who get put in front of you, so I can't fault them, but when they have been tested against some of the more elite teams, they typically kind of cave, to be honest with you. And they've had a couple of overall tournaments that were quite embarrassing, like the last Copenhagen games, or the last time they went to IEM Sydney, or like what the most recent major even. So there's definitely been some mixed results here from this team, and I don't know if this is really the move that puts them over the edge to finally start cracking more into the top 5, just because of, again, some of the role conflicts I've talked about, and just not knowing exactly how all the pieces are going to fit, even if some promise is there as far as individual skill level goes. Now, when you go over to Heroic, you're going to have Mertz coming in, and for the first time in a long time, Heroic has a true primary opper since Yugi's departure. They've been kind of throwing it around a little bit, but now they will have someone coming in who you know for sure is going to be the primary op. So maybe that could help out with roles, but you know, how's it going to work for Mertz? Because he's moving from like a structured system with an experienced in-game leader, excuse me, to a team that probably has a looser leadership foundation. In fact, I don't even know who's calling for this team. Is it going to be a Cillian who was calling for Imperial before he got cut from that team or left or what have you, though he's not classically known as an in-game leader? Is it going to be, you know, Freiberg who was doing it initially? Is it? I think Esatag was actually leading most recently, if I'm not mistaken. I think I saw that in an interview somewhere or something like that. So if that's the case, like, I'm not sure what the leadership's like on this team. I know they just picked up the coach in Nasu, but I don't know, you know, how he is as a coach, to be honest with you. I mean, I know he coached teams like Red Reserve, formerly Godsent, and he's been on a couple different teams as a coach, but I don't know how good of a coach he is. It's always really hard to judge that unless you get anecdotes from players or you're able to talk to people behind the scenes and get a good feel, but otherwise you're kind of left in the dark about that. So yeah, it's going to be weird because with more freedom, that's where he seemed to kind of struggle on North when he was given freedom, didn't really have a support system around him. So I don't know if this is going to be good or bad for Mertz's play, you know, moving into a system like this. I really don't know if this team has enough overall firepower. When you look across the lineup, you're like, where's my star player? It doesn't feel like they have one. They have a bunch of decent players that are pretty good, but it just doesn't seem like they have like a clear name that you know can carry or that you know can be someone that you can rely on in and out to produce big numbers. I mean, there's a couple of players who can do it here and there. And again, this team has had some okay, like best of one results since when these DreamHack open stops and stuff like that. But, you know, still nothing to get really hyped about. And with this move, unless Mertz like turns into a god all of a sudden with the AWP and just continues his upward trajectory from North, but in a you know, maybe a worse environment, depends on how you look at it. I just don't know who can carry this team, and I don't know how this team is going to be led. And there's just way too many question marks around this team for me to have too much faith in it. I mean, I'm sure they can be better than 30th in the world. I'm sure they can rise above that. But as far as like cracking into the top 10, probably not. Maybe like top 15, I guess. Maybe you could still see them like making playoffs at DreamHack Open events. But as far as like doing really well at a Tier 1 event, I mean, yeah, they got that top 8 at EPL, but I just don't know. I don't really see it. It would be impressive if they did with the lineup that they have on paper, to be 100% honest with you. I would be rather impressed if they could. So hats off to them if they can. Wish them the best. But despite the fact that, you know, bringing in a primary opera probably helps with roles on this team, I just don't know if they have the lineup to really produce. And so that's it. I didn't want to make this video too crazy long, but I wanted to talk a little bit about Mertz, a little bit about niko, a little bit about what these teams are going to face now at this trade, if it stands past the major, at least for now, though, for the foreseeable future it will, and talk a little bit about how things might work. Again, have to see these teams play first before we can really talk about it, but I just want to give my initial thoughts on these players and the move itself. So hope you enjoy the video. Please subscribe for more content. Thanks so much.